the rudder! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an Enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances, the podcast where we take you down the rabbit hole into the fantastic world of the strange, paranormal, and the unknown. I'm Morgan Knudsen. Come along with me on this week's adventure. Guys, we have a very, very, very special guest that I am so excited about today. I was so thrilled when he agreed to join us for our amazing hour bi-weekly. Dacre Stoker, the great-grandnephew of the incredibly talented Bram Stoker. And for those very few of you who don't know who Bram Stoker is, he was the author and creator of the infamous Dracula. And Dacre is one of these people who will delight you at every single turn, which I can only imagine Bram was the same way. He is a New York Times and international best-selling co-author of Dracula the Undead, which came out in 2009, and Dracula, which came out in 2018. He is also the co-editor of The Lost Journal of Bram Stoker, The Dublin Years, which was in 2012. He's published Stoker on Stoker, Dracula Revealed in 2022, which was a companion book to his audiovisual presentations, which he takes all over the world. He's phenomenal. He is a native of Montreal, Canada, guys. He is a native of Montreal. And believe it or not, he was teaching PE and sciences for 22 years in Canada and the States, but he's consulted all over the place on History Channel, Historical Haunts, PBS, Travel Channel. I mean, you name it, you guys have probably seen him around. He's amazing. But the neat thing is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this later, is that he actually hosts tours to Whitby, England. Anybody that's a big Dracula fan knows the significance of Whitby, England, Dublin, Ireland, Cruden Bay, Scotland, everywhere that Bram Stoker lived, worked, you name it. You guys can literally go and see these places with the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker. Like, you cannot get better than that. But today we're talking about something that surprised me a lot. And I am a big Dracula fan, admitted. I love vampires. I love the lore throughout the world. But Bram Stoker had an incredible connection to parapsychology and the paranormal. This was not just an offshoot for him of a fantasy story that he put together after doing some research. No. This had major ties for him and roots in real life paranormal, parapsychological encounters that he was researching at the time. Who knew? But Dacre is going to be able to expand on this so much more. Let's get this going, you guys. Let's have at it.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Switch to Shiseido Benefiance Wrinkle Smoothing Eye Cream and discover why people are calling it the best eye cream. A powerhouse formula that targets 5 types of eye area wrinkles. 96% of users saw reduced wrinkles and diminished dark circles after just 7 days. Shop Shiseido Benefiance Wrinkle Smoothing Eye Cream at Sephora and discover how change can happen in the blink of an eye. Consumer tested by 110 women.
If you thought goldenly breaded McDonald's chicken couldn't get more golden, think Golder. Because new sweet and smoky special edition gold sauce is here. Made for your chicken favorites. At participating McDonald's for a limited time.
Well, this is wonderful, and I'm so grateful that you were able to join me on Supernatural Circumstances. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Morgan, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be on your show. It's our time of season, isn't it? The fall spooky season. It's our time to, I'd say, shine, but it's more our time in the shadows.
Time in the shadows. It really is. It's such a wonderful time of year, I think, because people delve a little bit more into things like historical literature and things like that bring up those maybe old memories or feelings about all of this. And I can relate to you a little bit because not only with the Canadian connection that we've been sort of chatting about off air, but also because I've got a very famous historical relative in Ontario as well, and it's so amazing to talk with somebody like you that has such an incredible legacy with Bram Stoker. And I was wondering, maybe you can talk to the audience a little bit about that.
Yeah. So here's how I came to end up in Eastern Canada. So Bram Stoker was born in 1847, just outside of Dublin, Ireland. He was one of 7 children. His youngest brother, George, was my great-grandfather. So of 7 kids, only 3 had offspring. Bram did. Bram had a son. The son had a daughter. And there's still some of that part of the family tree still alive today, my cousins. One of his other brothers, Tom, had a daughter, but that side of the family has died out. So of 7, only 2 have offspring still alive today. So George had a son and a daughter. His daughter never married, but the son, Tom, actually moved to Montreal after the World War I. And he actually helped start the Montreal Stock Exchange, if you can believe it. And that's how our branch of the Stokers came from Ireland to England and then over to Canada.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
Pretty cool legacy to be a part of, yeah.
I had no idea that there was the Canadian connection, and it's so exciting because, oddly enough, that's not really discussed here very much. And that's it surprises me, but it doesn't surprise me because my great-great-grandfather was one of the founders of one of the first parapsychology, or a president of one of the first parapsychology associations in Canada. And that's not talked about very much either, which is interesting. There's this sort of shadow, if you will, over subject matter like this here in Canada. I wonder if you've run into that as well.
Yeah, obviously you look nowadays on television, reality TV is full of paranormal investigations, right? And it's a broad term. But you really have to go back to, the 1800s when this movement was getting recognized and taking steam, partly in upstate New York, which is not that far from Ontario and Quebec. It's sort of then moved over to England, and it sort of picked up credibility with people like Arthur Conan Doyle, who actually was a very good friend of Bram Stoker's, business associate. Yeah, they actually did stuff together. He brought a play that Bram helped adapt. Bram was invited to his wedding. He wrote an article about Arthur Conan Doyle. He got a very nice letter from Conan Doyle congratulating him on Dracula. So in the broader scope, here's how I tend to explain it, and your listeners may appreciate this. So you got to look at the what was going on in society at the time when Bram Stoker was being influenced by things around him. So Charles Darwin wrote and published a book called Origin of the Species in 1859, and that rocked the religious world on its behind. It was sort of
Absolutely.
like, that was the sort of like that point was like, oh, wait a sec, you mean what our priest and our vicar or minister is telling us every Sunday may not be the definitive truth on what happens in life, what happens in death. It's God's will. It's still a good playbook, right, to run a good life and so on. But there may be more than that. The theory of evolution may be just questioning creativity. And then with all that came tremendous amount of scientific change going on with not just the scientific process, but medicine. Bram had 3 brothers. George, my great-grandfather, was one of them. He invented ozone therapy, if you can believe it. His older brother, Thornley, was knighted for his contributions to medicine. He was the head of the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland. He actually helped Bram with all the medical sides of Dracula. So it was
phenomenal.
Accurate. So medical science was advanced. And then industrial science. I mean, there were so many inventions that were made during these times of the early Industrial Revolution. And so the world was sort of spinning its wheels. But what free thinkers, people like Bram Stoker, Conan Doyle, Mark Twain, who was a good friend and neighbor of Bram Stoker's, were the type of guys that would want to think beyond what was being spoon-fed in the church on Sunday. And that is, what about the spirits of the dead? Can we communicate with our spirits? Where do they go? What happens? And so spiritualism, mesmerism, these elements, the supernatural, the occult, all these things were beginning to be looked at. These were, Morgan, the original paranormal investigators, right?
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And Bram Stoker included that stuff into Dracula, and we'll get to that in a little while. But that's sort of my preamble towards Bram had a very dark sense of imagination, but he was also a broad thinker. And I really believe he was a person who was the sign of the times that was thinking about, and he wrote about things like second sight in his other books, ghosts, the supernatural. It wasn't just, strictly related to Dracula. So that's my sort of beginning monologue.
I think it's brilliant. And what's really cool as well to sort of rope in Conan Doyle is J.B. Rhine of the Rhine Institute, when he started his journey down into parapsychology from Duke University and things like that, his vision and his life took a turn after he heard a lecture from Conan Doyle about spiritism and spirituality, and he realized, like, this is it for me. This is the calling that I need to go down. And of course the rest is history. But it's so interesting that Bram seemed to have that similar calling as well, because what I've found talking to so many people over the years. I mean, I've been in this field for close to 25 years now. And what I find really interesting is that once people get a glimpse into it, it really becomes a driving force for them. And it comes out in like all of these different amazing ways. But sometimes it's literature, sometimes it's study, and it seems like Bram had that as well. Is that accurate?
Well, I definitely think he was interested, but Bram compartmentalized many things. All right, so you got to go back a little farther to sort of put this in perspective. The age of 0 to 7 had a very mysterious illness. Nobody knows what it was. I think it was respiratory allergies, serious asthma that debilitated him. He was really an invalid for the first 7 years of his life. During those years, his mother, his nanny, kept him interested, kept him educated, read him stories, and these were dark stories. One of them in particular we know about was the story of Charlotte Stoker, Bram's mom, surviving the cholera epidemic of 1832, where she actually witnessed at the age of 14 people being misdiagnosed, buried prematurely, and crawling out of the graves, the undead.
Oh my God.
and as a little boy himself hearing that. And then when you analyze, as you probably have, Irish folklore and superstition, they're all cautionary tales, and they're all telling you horrible things about if you don't do things right, the banshee's going to do this, or the puka, or all sorts of things are going to suck your life, change, do whatever. So he was exposed to all of that, and that gave him this dark sense of imagination. But he also then grew up to be sort of a big man on campus at Trinity College. He was the head of the Philosophical Society, the head of the Historical Society. So he was a guy, had a bit of a philosopher in him, had a historical side to him. He loved drama. He actually wrote theatrical reviews. So it would be an understatement to say he was a broad thinker. But I believe, and see how this resonates to you, Morgan, and your listeners, that this one quote that I often pull out of Dracula, there are mysteries which men can only guess at, which age by age they may solve only in part. That's Van Helsing, the scientist, trying to explain to Seward, the doctor. You've got to open up your mind a little bit. The scientific process may not accommodate all things as we understand it in the world, maybe as you see it and as you prove it scientifically, but not as exist. So I think that summed up Bram. I think he was this larger thinker, but he also was a civil servant and dealt with the law. He actually created a legal manual, the first one in Ireland, as a clerk of petty sessions, an inspector of all clerks. And he actually passed the bar exam in London to be a practicing lawyer. Although he chose not to, he stayed in the theater. So he kind of led this more than dual life. The detail side of his brain, that law side of his brain, was at work with contracts and everything else. But the very creative side of his brain, that broader thinking of there are mysteries in life, and his writing, his poetry, and creating plays and so on. So this was a very complex man. And when he was working at the theater 27 years with Henry Irving, who became the first actor knighted, so they were both very successful.
Right.
He was that kind of contained guy. But on his holidays, when he'd go to Whitby or Cruden Bay, he was that open-minded, let me start thinking of cool and interesting things when he could write. And when he was in Scotland, northern Scotland, he got exposed to very interesting pagan rituals. And there was a similar duality in the lives of people in Cruden Bay, where he went to at least 11 years we have records on. And it was the fishermen who would go to church on Sunday, very strict religious practices.
Sure.
But as soon as they got into their boat to head off to do their fishing and be subjected to the powers of nature, they would kind of lapse back into pagan rituals, like drive 2 circles around this way, or throw things overboard to make sure the gods were happy.
Right.
So
yeah.
I think Bram was the same thing, Morgan. That what he did was recognize the role of religion in the world. That's why in Dracula you still had the band of heroes with the cross, Van Helsing with the wafers, the host, the holy water. But it was also all about faith in man itself, right? And good and evil, the supernatural, what is happening in between life and death, and what's happening to Mina's spirit, to Lucy's spirit as she's converted. So this, I've been at this 15 years, Morgan, and I haven't quite got it. And I don't think everybody who is equally as crazy as I am that looks into it. And it's not a big deal that we don't get it. It's just that there are still mysteries about this, and we're going to learn more. And the more things we find out about Bram, some unpublished stuff, the more times you read Dracula or his other novels and you compare things, the more you get an understanding of how this man was guided by a very interesting time in history when all about him was sort of great men and women, tarot card readings, seances, connecting with, other places in the world that we don't know of, that we can't quite get at. So it was a it's cool to be digging into him, but by all means, I haven't found it all yet, so I'm on a cool mission.
Oh, absolutely. Like, and I can so relate to you because I feel very similarly with my own family history as well. And that's the one thing that I found with the story of Dracula and just how many layers that he built into it. And no matter what age you read it, or no matter what point in time in your own sort of philosophical journey that you're in, you will get something new from it. Like, I get something new today than I did even 10 years ago when I read it, especially the dynamic that you're talking about with Van Helsing and Seward, and then, you know, people trying to figure out, well, what's reality, what's not reality, you know, how much of this are we attracting to ourselves, which I always found an interesting angle that he put in as well, is, you know, what is it about our own psychology that is, you know, attracting something like this? And I found with my own great-grandfather, A.D. Watson, he was in a very similar situation to Bram, in the sense that he was a physician, a very well-known physician in Ontario, was a poet, he was an astronomer. He had all of this incredible background. He was very well respected by his community in academia. And he, like Bram, was being surrounded mostly by his friends who were very interested in spirituality and channeling and things like that, sort of got pulled into this other realm of thinking. And it just influenced everything that AD did. And I think exactly what you're saying is dead on, is that when that was such a unique time in our history where we had to start evolving and growing, not out of the science books necessarily, but in something that's so much greater and broader, and maybe the beginning of understanding things like the big questions of consciousness, and stuff like that. It seems to me where Bram was kind of headed with some of what he was doing.
Yeah, you're right. I'll insert this part of what I believe evolved in his life as that sort of greater power. And it might have been a reaction to an Irishman, you know, as a Protestant, growing up in a country divided by Catholicism and Protestantism.
Sure.
But he moved to England, and then he was an outsider as an Irishman in London, working at a theater, even though he had a very high status, working as Henry Irving's manager and managing the whole theater. But I think, being the philosopher that he was quite interested in the belief system of the world around him, that people were believing in, you know, a god, or many different gods. When he started conversing and reading Walt Whitman, they became pen pals. They only met, I believe, twice. When Bram came to America 8 times, I think 2 times he actually met Whitman. But I believe they shared an interest in this something called pantheism, which is this sort of holistic type of following a religion, so to speak, that the whole world matters and all religions, it's okay. But what's really important is essentially Mother Earth. And I think Bram identified with that starting around 1892 when he went to Cruden Bay, Scotland. And I've been up to Cruden Bay. It's north of Aberdeen, and it's very interesting topography because there's not a lot of buildings. It's a small fishing village, and it still is to this day. Whitby, on the other hand, has grown up to be a very popular tourist destination, and, you know, although it's not skyscrapers, you've got more buildings than when Bram was there. But Cruden Bay, you get this feeling, especially when the tide is out. It's a very rocky, rugged coast, and when the tide goes out, and they've got about a 15-foot fall of the tide, you see these really huge rocky reefs out in the bay, where they have actually been the cause of shipwrecks. And so Bram actually referred to this area as the Sea of Bones. from these sailors, travelers, who have been shipwrecked and died and are not resting at peace in the bottom of this, the bottom of the ocean. And in one of the books in particular, Morgan, he wrote of a ghost walk where the spirits of those lost at sea over the centuries have all sort of come up and walk and find a place of refuge. And there, funnily enough, there actually is St. Olaf's Well on the coast, coming out of what now is a very posh but interesting links golf course. And this well had this reputation of healing waters. And so what Bram had was the ghosts coming out of the ocean looking for some place to heal, to find a place to rest in peace. And they all sort of went into the well. But it is back to the point of, it seemed that the ocean, the sky, the sun, the moon, the earth, everything sort of converges here and is right at your fingertips. You don't have to look for it. And Bram spent the last few years of his life, and and to all your listeners and yourself as well, it seems that when people know they're the end of their mortal life, some of them get even more dialed into what's going to happen in the afterlife, right?
Very much so, and very well documented. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So he stayed in the little village just down the bay from Cruden Bay, Whinnyfold, or Vinnyfold as they called it. And he had set up a hammock, and he had had a stroke at this time, but he spent hours laying on the hammock looking out at the scars, they called them. This is this reef area, and just enjoying nature, and sort of lapping it all up. And he was determined, even though he was in ill health, to get there, which was not easy from London. It was about 5 different trains and, a full day's travel. And Florence took him there. And when I go there, I've been there now twice, I really think that I can identify with what he identified, which was that connection, that mortal connection between life as you and I know it, but also the underworld. And the final thing to back up my theory on this is he mentioned in an article, in an interview, that he found Cruden Bay by looking at a geological survey map. And he saw where there had been massive upheavals when the earth was formed between the granite, which is the pink rock, and the gneiss, K-N-I-C-E, the black rock. And it had this upheaval right there at Cruden Bay. And so the rocks that I'm talking about and the rocky coast, the crest of these rocks are pink and black. And I think that's, even before he got there, he knew what he was looking for by doing his research on the geological survey map. That's what got him there. And then he was there, it all kind of played out. So wow. I think this is a guy that, he played by the book, followed religion, but he also developed this other appreciation for Mother Nature and the underworld. He was very into, in his novels, not just Dracula, volcanoes, earthquakes, all that underworld stuff, as well as spiritualism and things on top of the underworld.
Yeah, well, there's so many layers when you start to delve into, I think, just this subject matter in general. Like, I started out years ago just with this interest in people's spiritual encounters and belief systems, and I was fascinated by where it was taking people. What did that mean for what we were experiencing, how we were understanding and reading the world? What did this all mean? And I found that the more I dove into what I thought was something external, it's not. It's something that's very much your own journey. And everything that you're talking about with what you think that Bram was probably tapping into and experiencing, I think you're dead on. We look at people, especially people who are terminal or sort of know that their time is coming up, and they are typically far more in tune and often have a very similar I guess, set of, I don't want to say beliefs, but perceptions that we see in children when they're really, really young. When everything's, the ego, everything just gets stripped away and you get to experience the world, I think, a little bit more as it's meant to be received and experienced. So it doesn't surprise me at all that he was one of those people, because I mean, if you spend a lifetime looking into things that, you know, many people I think would consider just really, really strange, after a while people like you and I consider this something that's probably relatively normal, but it's one of those things that when you once you see it and get connected with it, it's very, 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 very hard to put down. You can't unsee it.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that thing about children, because you triggered a thought that I got to tell a story about
Please
Bram.
do.
So in my research, you know, I'm looking for things like Bram was looking for, real experiences that you can use in your novels, right? That's what J.D. Barker and I used in Dracula, Ian Holt in Dracula the Undead. You find things that Bram was thinking of in his notes. You find things in your own life that you thought of, that could be inserted here. And I think Bram was always on the lookout for that. So in my digging, I found a newspaper in Dundee, Scotland. So it was a newspaper writer, Norval Scrimmanger. And he was a journalist who did believe in second sight. And so J.D. Barker and I actually used him in Dracula doing sort of an occultish cool thing. In 1931, he wrote of an encounter with Bram at a social engagement, sort of a cocktail party reception, primarily for Henry Irving. But he said, and I was far more entertained by listening to Bram Stoker holding court around the fireplace as he was smoking a pipe and having his brandy, where he told of two separate incidences where he himself experienced second sight. But he waited over 30 years to write this. So Bram died in 1912. He didn't write it until 31, but he didn't meet Bram in 1912. He met him way back in 1892 or 1893, one of Bram's earlier visits there. So I'll just give you a short version of both of them. One of them is Bram said, when I was in Edinburgh meeting with a friend, and I met his wife, and the wife was holding a little baby. And the 4-year-old daughter came in to the room and sort of interrupted everybody because it was sort of grown-up time, and the wife was holding the baby, and the little girl was crying. And the father or mother said, what's the matter? And I think the little girl's name that was being held by the mom was Sarah. Sarah's going to die. And he said, what do you mean? She's fine. No, I see her dying. She won't play with me anymore. And it's like, what do you mean? She'll never play with me again. And so this little girl, what they were saying was she had some sort of premonition.
Sure.
And, back in those days, kids caught things and they would die fairly soon, but it's usually not instantly.
Yeah.
But the next day, little Sarah died.
Wow.
So the 4-year-old somehow had the feeling, the vibe, the premonition, whatever it was, that death was going to visit this little girl overnight. And there was no, apparently no fever, no nothing. It wasn't like a long drawn illness. So that's the first one. The second one is Bram had been invited to go to visit the Earl of Errol. Now, the Earl of Errol was the guy that owned all the land around Cruden Bay, like these earls would. Big castle. And it was customary to invite visiting sort of dignitaries like Bram, who was a big wig, to come visit the Earl. So Bram had visited him, and he got the invite, because he had stayed there for a month.
Sure.
The invite to go pheasant hunting, with pheasant shooting, they called it, with the Earl and all the other sort of hoity-toities in the area. So it was a big deal.
Wow.
And what you do was you'd have Bram, and you'd have a guide. They called him a gilly. who would be your loader. He'd carry the guns for you. And you'd be walking along, for half a day. The dogs would be doing their work to spot the pheasant. And then somebody would beat the bushes, the pheasants would fly, and if it was anywhere near you, you'd take the shot. If you needed another shot, you didn't have to load your own gun. You handed it to the ghillie, hand you another fresh one ready to go. So Bram developed the rapport with the ghillie during the half day they spent walking through the highlands. And he said, "How's the Earl?" Some just, little small talk. And the ghillie said, "Oh, the veil is getting high. The veil is getting high." And probably your listeners more than others would understand that means he's close to death as the veil that goes over your... And Bram said, "Oh, don't be silly. He looks very healthy. He looks fine." "Oh, no. Mark my words." So, Bram is a little saddened, but what the heck, what do you do? So you go back, and they all have, port, sherry, and then back to the hotel, and they end up, Florence and Bram and son end up going back to London, and, there's no record of anything happening, so he thought, this ghillie, is just full of it. Next summer he comes, he gets invited to go shooting again with the Earl. "Nice to see you again." And Bram says, "Oh, I'd like the same ghillie," because he wants to sort of, stick it to him like, "Hey, you were wrong about the Earl." And he says, out and again, they're shooting the pheasant, doing their thing. And he goes, "Well, how is the Earl now? I guess the veil's not so high. Ha, ha, ha." "Oh, no, Mr. Stoker, it's higher still." And he goes, "Oh, come on. He's been fine. You said that last year." And sure enough, Morgan, in 2 days, the Count died of a totally unexpected, as they are, brain aneurysm.
Wow.
So this was not something you'd get, in your checkup. Obviously, back in those days, they didn't get the annual checkups we did. And even if you did, you still can't find an about-to-be brain aneurysm. But that ghillie, like the little girl, was sensitive, as many people are that have second sight or experience these things, have not only a belief in it, but an open mind and a sensitivity to it. So that was not only something that Bram was recounting that he witnessed. He then went on, within a few months, to do a book review. This is bizarre, but this is the degree of digging that I do when I'm not talking on podcasts or writing my own stories with somebody, is I dig for stuff. And I found that Bram did a book review of a book by a Scottish writer called McCrae for a newspaper in New Zealand about second sight in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. And he reviewed this guy McCrae's book and didn't poo-poo the whole thing. He was definitely saying, yeah, McCrae's onto something. This has great credibility. I've seen things myself. So I can go fairly confidently to you on your show here and saying, Bram was most likely a believer because he didn't put it down. But he didn't come out and say, yeah, I believe in this stuff. But he was enough of a believer to support it and talk about it and get into a newspaper article about it. But furthermore, now here's a freebie for you and your listeners. BramStoker.org is a website that's run by a university professor, does a great job collecting all of Bram Stoker's public domain works, which are most of them. Right? Because he died in 50, so 1962, it's public domain. In the book, The Mystery of the Sea, the first chapter is called The Seer. And he published that as a short story before the book came out. So if any of your listeners want to dig into Bram Stoker and his understanding and sensitivities to second sight, just go look at, for free, The Seer. It's a short story. It takes place in Cruden Bay, and there's a lady that he's called Gormala. She's really not called that, but there's an old sage woman in the town that really did practice this and had premonitions. And Bram wrote all about it and then included that in the bigger story, The Mystery of the Sea.
That's incredible. And yet, at the same time, entirely surprising. Like, I feel when over the years, as I've read Dracula and read different bits and pieces of it and different pieces of Bram's work, the way he articulates the characters really spoke to me. The fact that he's either experienced things like what you're talking about, or he is that believer, is doing his research, even just in many of Van Helsing's arguments that he has, and how he phrases his position is so, I guess, indicative of how people today, academics today, that are fighting for parapsychology to be a bit more mainstream and fighting for funding. So many of the things that Van Helsing spoke about in those books are arguments that still hold very true. And I think hold very true for me as well, is just being able to challenge what we think we know, because we don't know much. And his ability to say, look, like this isn't about casting away science. This is about understanding that this is a melding of understanding these old traditions, like what he was doing with, understanding pagans and things like that, and being able to combine it with the science that is slowly catching up to what people understand. And I think that's why, like you were saying with the fisherman on the boat, science and things like that, it's great. And then there's another element to it that when the chips are down, that's kind of what we fall back on. And you could kind of, for me, I can see that with Bram within his writing. Has there been, because I mean, you've been all over the place looking for material and understanding his journey. Has there been moments for you in this that have really surprised you about him?
I tell you, probably the biggest surprise is when I found his journal on the Isle of Wight. It was a house that one of his great-grandsons live in, and I actually enlisted a fellow Canadian, Dr. Elizabeth Miller, who's no longer living. She died just at the end of COVID, but she was working at University of Toronto, and she had deciphered, along with another Canadian from Vancouver, Robert 18 Bassang, the Dracula notes. So when I found this journal, which Bram kept during his college years and his first couple of years in London when he was working for Irving, and Miller and I, it took us a year to transcribe the whole thing because Bram's handwriting was terrible, and it was really only for his own consumption, right? It was just thoughts. Right. But that whole experience, which took us about a year and a half, to not only read and understand what caught Bram's eye, what things he thought were important enough to write down, social issues that sort of, I could tell, bothered him, like and it sounds cliche, but, men getting drunk in Ireland and beating their wives. It's like that's a cliche sort of thing during the Victorian era, but that stuff really happened. And Bram would see these poor ladies on the street, black and brew, lying down, just lying in the street. That really bothered Uncle Bram. But there was that sort of side, that sort of side of like, if this, what about this? What about this? He was constantly thinking about things. So that was like a year's full of those moments. And it's hard to isolate it down to one thing, but I did jot down one thing that would classify as a cool discovery, although I didn't discover it. It was a guy called, I've already forgotten his name, Richard Dalby, in 1987, I think, found the original preface to Dracula that was buried in the Icelandic edition of Dracula, and then the full preface that was in Iceland got narrowed down to this book right here, the 1897 version in England. But it ended with this, and I'd like to see your reaction, because Bram was a literary guy. He and Irving would have been very familiar with all of Shakespeare's works.
Sure.
There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. That's what ended the original preface to Dracula. There are more things in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in our philosophy. And that was a line from Hamlet. And it's obviously all about ghosts. And as you were just chatting, it made me think, and I'd like your listeners to sort of think about it, because you've probably all seen a couple different versions of Dracula movies. But the novel itself is all about why this band of heroes, the high society guys, and Dr. Seward, the doctor scientist, they had the wherewithal and the sense to bring in Van Helsing. Because it was Van Helsing who was not only a professor, a doctor, right? He was a lawyer, he had legal background, all those things that could easily have narrowed his mind, like what was happening to doctors and professors and lawyers in London society.
Yep.
But he was from Holland. He understood the bigger picture. He stressed the importance of there are more things in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in your philosophy to the narrow-minded Dr. Seward, who was this scientist who had to have everything proved. And he said that, the Mysteries quote, after Seward was dumbfounded. They were giving all these blood transfusions to Mina. The next day they'd come back and they'd find poor Mina pale. They'd just given her all kinds of blood. There was no blood lying on the floor, and yet she didn't have much blood left in her, barely alive. They couldn't get the concept of Dracula coming in the window, drinking her blood, so they were dumbfounded. And he said, I need you to believe in things that you know to be untrue. And that's what was limiting science at the time. And that's why I was liking what you were saying a little bit earlier about we are now, I mean, this was only 128 years ago, but we're still struggling with that, aren't we? We're still struggling with the concept of there are more things in heaven and earth, and yet we've got some tools to connect with these spirits. We've got signs of UFOs. We've got all sorts of things, but we're not believing them because we don't want to believe in something we can't prove it perfectly under our existing currency.
Well, and it's such a unique position as well, because now with our evolving understanding of parapsychology and our perception, and how our perception often dictates our reality, and how so much of this is intertwined. As quantum physics is evolving, we're beginning to understand that our reality is very dependent on our belief system. It becomes such a dichotomy, and I think, and maybe Bram understood this back when he was writing, is the fact that because that line, not only that line, but that red thread of belief. What do you believe throughout the entire book? You know, whether it be Harker when he gets there and his worldview is pretty much shattered by when he's staying at the castle. He's seeing things that he can't explain. He's got the worldview of all of these different characters is breaking apart. The only one that is basically looking around like this is normal is Van Helsing, like what you were saying. And I what's so neat about this, I think, and what makes this just as relevant today is exactly what you were talking about. What it comes back to the individual and to us. What is it that we are believing that is either hindering our journey forward, or is it creating the open door to be receiving this new information that's coming? And there seems to be, I think, more of that information that seems to be being readily made available. But like you say, if we are constantly looking for that one piece of physical thing to make us believe. It's kind of the chicken and the egg, a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. And I've got to say this. The novel Dracula proceeded to about 2/3 of the way through until Van Helsing was able to make inroads with the band of heroes and the scientist. But the catalyst for that was actually Mina Harker. She gets back from her visit to Budapest where she saves her husband, and she's the one she's the modern woman, right? She is, this proves that Bram was a bit of a feminist that he got from his mom, that she, through typing up the notes, listening to the recording phonograph of Dr. Seward, correlating everything from the Band of Heroes, Harker's journal as well, kind of like Bram's own journal. It's no mystery that Bram and Harker are very similar, somewhat of an autobiographical little insert. But she's the one that was sort of like, we need to look at all this together. You can't think of things in isolation. And she connects with Van Helsing on all of that. That's why Van Helsing says to her something like, you were a bright light, the light of all lights. Yes. He gave her this ultimate compliment. Not the whole time, because remember, he even said, oh, she's got the mind of a man, which was, in those days, that was a compliment. Now you'd get slapped and you'd be canceled. But that was something that was a huge compliment. Is she had the mind. Mind you, Bram still inserted Lucy to show what happens if you're a socialite and the only concerns in your day are which of these three suitors you're going to marry. Mina is the school teacher. She's the one that can go off on her own to go save her husband, come back, correlate everything together. And even then, even after there's a little bit of a blood exchange, and Morgan, she has the mental connection to the Count, right? Because she has had the blood exchange. She's the one that understands where he's going. She is able to, through hypnosis, give all this info to Van Helsing and the rest of the boys. And at the same time, she's merciful when she pleads for pity for Count Dracula, as she knows the boys are going to destroy him, but it's pity him. I guess you sort of be gentle as you do so. But nonetheless, that's how she's depicted in the story. So I think what Bram is saying is there's 50% of the population that we're not even accounting for right now, but you better, because they're the future. And they're the future of this world. And by golly, he was right. It just took a while for women to be looked at as equals, to have the vote, be able to work, write typewriters, not just make babies and look pretty. It is kind of interesting when you dissect what's going on in the story and the broader picture of, what are the things that Bram is trying to explain, and religion and science and beyond that. There's one more quick thing I want to slide in here. Absolutely. Because I've had a lot of fun finding things that Bram didn't use from his notes. And Robert 18 Pisang from Vancouver and Elizabeth Miller from Toronto helped me find this. Bram was actually thinking of a psychic research agent as a character in the story Dracula.
Interesting.
But I believe what he did was he combined that, and he did that with a number of characters. He had 3 pages in his notes of characters with, as authors do, we write characterization. I got to have a hockey star. He's got to be 6'5". He's got to be really big. He comes from Edmonton, whatever. But I got other characters, and he lists everything. He didn't actually end up having Alfred Singleton. I've used him in some other of my stories, but so he was thinking this. But it was plain as day on the first list of characters.
Yeah.
But it didn't make it in. What I did think he did is he combined it with Max Winchhoffel, who was this German historian. That became Van Helsing. Van Helsing had these three, and if you think about it as well, and if you're a listener and you're an author, it's difficult to have too many characters floating around in your story. It gets confusing. So Bram had to combine them, and that's why we see such a very interesting and complex character in Abraham Van Helsing.
That it makes so much sense. And just to touch a bit on your point about Mina too, is even just to take it one level deeper than just sort of her feminist role, but also the fact that she is that light bringer, and that when Van Helsing talks about her as the brightest light, it really then blends back into what we were talking about before, where it's like, this is the consciousness that you need to be listening to. It might not be the most obvious consciousness because she's female or she's, little school teacher, but I think the fact that she is the educator, that she is considered by Van Helsing to be the light, where maybe the others are just literally looking at her like the little school teacher. But on that level, the fact that Van Helsing sees that so quickly, I think, is lending to his second sight illusions as well, is the fact that not only is he investigating this, but it's like he picks her out so quickly and says, you've got it. You figured it out. You've got it. And I like just really cool. But I want to give you some time as well to talk about these amazing tours that you're doing for people, because this stuff, I mean, you are making this accessible and bringing it off the page for people to actually go and experience and be a part of this legacy. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. It's cool to actually go to some of the places that influence Bram. So here's the skinny. And I've been to Romania now 14 times. Some of them are on research trips. Some of them are coming over specific conferences, others leading tours. And so I'll be leading a tour this coming October the 27th to November 7th. And the company is Mysterious Adventure Tours. You can check them out online, Mysterious Adventure Tours. They do tours all over. But this is a specific Halloween tour to Romania. We are going to be starting in Bucharest and traveling all around the country. Some of the highlights, we go to Bran Castle. Now, Bran Castle is their number one famous tourist attraction. It is the castle that Bram Stoker looked at in two books. Two of the books in the London Library that Bram used for his research. There's 26 in all. Two of them had sketches of this castle. The only castle in any of the books, there were sketches. So I am convinced he used these two pictures to describe his fictional castle Dracula. Plus, if you read the description, it looks exactly like the outside of Bran Castle. He never went there. The closest he got was Italy, when he buried his father. But luckily, lots of other adventurers went to Transylvania and wrote all about it. The train schedules, he got all right. The clothing, the topography, the history, all because lots of other writers had gone there. It's like you or I, Morgan, if we're going to do writing and do research, we go to Google it, right?
Sure.
Google Maps. But Bram obviously didn't have that, but he had these other adventure books. So we'll be going to Bran Castle. We'll be going to Sighișoara, where Vlad the Impaler was actually born. There's the footprint of the same house. There's now probably the different house, but the same place. Beautiful old wall city. We'll go to Snagov Monastery, where apparently Vlad was probably buried. We'll see a shrine to him. We'll have cool dinners. We'll have some wine tastings. We'll go to Corvin Castle. We'll go to Hoia Baciu Forest, which is one of the most haunted forests in Europe.
Yes.
Lots of cool places to let people feel the vibe. Modern places, old places, cool old villages, Saxon villages. So that's 12 days. And to me, it's in a step back in history into heaven. But the other cool thing we're doing, which is very unusual, is Maria Schmidt, who runs Mysterious Adventure Travels, has actually rented the whole Bran Castle on October the 30th. They hold a huge party outside in a tent for like 500 people. We're going to be inside the castle on the 30th, all by ourselves, just up to I think 100 people at the most on our tour, and others that they sold tickets to, just the party. And we're going to be doing very interesting. I'll be doing some entertaining along with some of the local guides there, giving the history of Queen Marie, as well as Vlad the Impaler, as well as Count Dracula, dancing, DJ, dinner, all that sort of thing. So that's a separate ticketed event. So all of that, you can find all that information at Mysterious Adventure Tours online. And one day you got to come. I mean, if you have you ever been to Romania? Is that on your bucket list?
I've never been. Well, it all of the lore from those areas has always been something that is so fascinating to me, and the different variations of vampires over in that in that area of the world, the Draugr and all of those unbelievable. So I mean, I think it would be an absolutely incredible journey to go on, and I hope one day I get the opportunity to go with you, because what an adventure. I mean, no one's ever going to forget standing in these places.
No, that's it. And we go to the actual town called Sibiu, where Emily Gerard, a Scottish lady, remember I talked about Scotland earlier?
Yes.
Bram actually hunted down this Scottish writer who had an interest in pagan rituals as well as organized religion. She was living in Vienna, married a guy who was transferred to northern Transylvania, and on her own, a lot like you, she went off and did some sort of groundbreaking work, studying superstitions and rituals and folklore in Transylvania, and she was the one that wrote the book Land Beyond the Forest, that Bram got word for word all the Transylvanian superstitions, how to kill a vampire, the wooden stake, and all the mention of Strigoi, Nosferatu, all this other stuff. That's how he got it without going there. So we go to that town where she was, where she lived. One of the cool things that I like to do while I'm there is read passages of the novel to the people on the tour that were happening right in that spot. And so we'll go to many of those same places. Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's phenomenal. And I'm going to put all of the links so people can get tickets and whatnot in the show notes, so that when this comes out, everybody's going to have everything accessible to them, because it's just a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I think it's phenomenal. Thank you so much for doing this for the last hour. This has been so wonderful to have such an incredible and deep discussion about such an amazing man and his works. And I feel like I'm connected to him now. I feel so much closer to who he was as a person. And just so thank you so much for this.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to connect with a fellow Canadian. Even though I've moved to South Carolina, I've kept my citizenship. Hopefully, I'll be able to stay here. But we're all good, and nice to chat with you. And good luck with your investigations and doing what you do. And thank you. I will send you those links if that's helpful. But thank you for your interest in my work and Bram. All right, take care now.
I'm always looking for ways to show my cat how much I love her. And with Fancy Feast gems, I can pamper her whenever I want with a savory gravy on top of a gourmet mousse pâté. The pyramid shape makes serving simple, so all I have to do is peel and plate to make mealtime feel extra fancy. And with 2 entrees in every pack, it's easy to turn every day into the extraordinary. Fancy Feast gems.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there's one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
Mint is still $15 a month for premium wireless. And if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 15 reasons why you should. 1, it's $15 a month. 2, seriously, it's $15 a month. 3, no big contracts. 4, I use it. 5, my mom uses it. Are you playing me off? That's what's happening, right? Okay, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan. $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track-downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
What an incredible conversation. I can't believe the incredible amount of information that I took away from this. I had no idea how connected Bram really was to the world of the paranormal and parapsychology. And, you know, Dacre's one of the most delightful people, truly, that I've had the privilege of talking with. Because not only is he incredibly insightful, as you guys heard, but he can really expand and expound and make you feel like you know who Bram is and was. And I can only imagine how proud Bram is right now, looking down at his great-grandnephew going, this guy's amazing. So I don't know how many of you guys are lining up right now to sign up for those tours, but I tell you, what a phenomenal experience that it would be. You know, when we often hear about these authors like Mary Shelley, you know, authors that we've come to know just throughout history over the years, even ones that are maybe more recent like Anne Rice and Clive Barker, who's a favorite of mine. You know, you often wonder if they've got fingers into this subject matter. And it's so phenomenal to learn that Bram really did. He really did have connections into real parapsychology phenomenon. And, you know, I got to digging around to see if Bram and A.D. Watson had ever actually connected and met. Because Bram was in Canada during the same time my great-great-grandfather was, you know, beginning some of his experiments. And it looks like they missed each other by literally a few years. A.D. started his work in parapsychology a little bit later, and Bram Stoker at that point was gone. And it makes me sad a little bit, because I mean, I'm sure they've connected in non-physical, but what an incredible partnership would that have been had they actually connected, because Bram was visiting Toronto at the time. That's where AD was getting started, and AD was still kind of in his skeptical stages of his career at that point. He hadn't really dove in as hard as he did to parapsychology in Canada. So they literally missed each other by a few years, which is unfortunate. But I tell you, this was such a blessing of a conversation, and what a great way, you guys, to kick off the Halloween season. I mean, I can't think of a better person to talk to. So I hope you guys go pick up Dacre's books. Phenomenal work. And get online. The links to the tours are going to be in the show notes. I want you guys to plug into that. If you're able to go do it. I mean, we will never ever regret spending money on a memory like that, right? It's just absolutely priceless, and what a journey through history that is. So, that being said, thank you guys for joining us on this eerie expedition, dear listeners. And remember, there is no line between the natural and the supernatural. All is consciousness. Until next time, stay curious, friends. Supernatural Circumstances is a co-production of Entity Seeker, Paranormal Research and Teachings, and the 20th Plane. This podcast is a part of the Curious Cast podcast network. You can find out more about me, Morgan Knudsen, and book me for live appearances at entityseeker.ca. You can also email the show at supernaturalcircumstances.com.
The end. For 4 years, Noah and Sarah have been clawing out from beneath the Denver airport. They have faced monsters, secret armies, and killing machines. But they're done running. This season on Escaping Denver, the truth is revealed, captives become legends, and a war 1,000 years in the making erupts around them. Join us for the end of our story.
The final season of Escaping Denver drops August 11th on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.